Recording in progress.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to NCHV's 2021 annual conference. I'm Cindy Borden. I'll be on the back end this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. It's still morning in some places that we have. We're glad you're back, and we're really thrilled for the session that we have today. This is a Zoom meeting, so those of you who were just in a GoToWebinar platform for our last session, remember this is a little bit different. Your phone lines are still muted, but you do have the ability to chat and interact with each other and also directly with the speakers through the chat function. And we do want you to use that to ask questions throughout the session. So we're thrilled to have you here, and we're thrilled to have our speakers here. Our topic for today is making the most of the low-income housing tax credit for veterans. And we have three speakers, and I'm going to let Deb do most of the introductions. But first we have Deb Burkhart. She's the National Vice President of Supportive Housing at National Equity Fund. And Deb is also on our board of directors and is just a champion for veterans issues. Interestingly, we have another speaker who's on our board of directors in this session too. So Deb, I'm going to hand things over to you to do the moderation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cindy. And I'm looking forward to charting the course around affordable housing for veterans with these two experts. Ralph Fasano is the Executive Director of Concern for Independent Living. He's been the ED there for over 28 years, which is a nonprofit agency that's focused in building housing for, he'll go into more detail, but people with everything from disabilities to at-risk and homeless veterans in New York State. And Brad Bridwell, who is my partner on the board of NCHV for almost a decade, is the Director of National Operations at Cloudbreak Communities. And Cloudbreak Communities was actually at the forefront of developing service-enriched properties for veterans and veterans who are at risk in locations from Phoenix to California, Las Vegas, and Houston, and Hawaii. And so he'll be telling a little bit about the work that they've been doing. So I'm first going to start with Ralph, and then Brad's going to tell us some work about Cloudbreak. We have a few questions for the panelists, for those of you who are interested in learning, how did these affordable housing developers manage during the pandemic? What are some of the challenges in the building affordable housing? But I also love to hear from you. So please send us some of your questions in the chat box, and we'll have a lively discussion over the next hour. So I want to pass this over first to Ralph, who will tell us a little bit about Concern for Independent Living, and then to Brad, and then we'll get into a discussion. Welcome, everyone.
Okay, thanks, Deb. So I'm really feel honored to be able to present at this conference. I have presented at one of the live conferences and look forward to doing that again someday. But for now, it's Zoom. So just to tell you a little bit about our agency, Concern for Independent Living was founded in 1972 in a state hospital here on Long Island in New York. And Long Island had the largest psychiatric hospitals in the world. And we became involved with providing some advocacy for the patients that were there, and later in developing housing in the community. And we've used the low-income housing tax credit to provide that housing both here on Long Island and in Brooklyn and in the Bronx. And today we'll show you some of the projects that we've used low-income housing tax credits to develop. So next slide. So these are some of the veterans from Liberty Village. This was our first tax credit project, and we had entered a competition. There was a federal base there that had been providing training for the armed forces, and that base was closing, and there was a local competition to develop housing there, or to do anything there, and we didn't think we had a chance at getting it, but we were chosen to do it. Many times when the base is closed, they offer an opportunity to homeless service providers, but then they do something else with the land. So we were really happy. And next slide, please. So Senator Schumer pictured that he was very helpful in helping us put this together. We applied for 9% tax credits, and at the time, there was very strict deadlines associated with the grants. And so New York State gave us 9 months to break ground, otherwise lose the funding. And we celebrated after getting the funding, and then everyone told us, you're never going to do this in 9 months. You have to get HUD's approval, you have to get the Department of Defense's approval, you have to have a zoning change and a site plan approval. If you do it within 2 years, you'd be really good. And we went to see Senator Schumer, and he came and he held a press conference, and he said he had very good connections at the Department of Defense. Leon Panetta was the secretary at the time, and he was roommates with him for a while. And he said they'll get their cooperation. Sean Donovan from New York State was the HUD secretary. He said he'll get the approvals there. And he had Rich Schaefer, the supervisor of the town next to him, who committed to saying the approvals would not delay the project. And we wound up breaking ground within the 9 months, and then celebrating a grand opening. This is 60 units, all for homeless veterans, 48 singles and 12 families. We relied heavily on NEF and Deb and her staff to help us put this together and provide the equity and bridge loans needed to develop the project. And it works wonderfully. This was a project where we had no community opposition whatsoever, and the community is still very supportive of the project and very happy that we're there. Next slide. So this is our second veterans project. This is in Lake Ronkonkoma, also here on Long Island. And this is on 5 acres of land, once again, 60 units, 30 units for homeless veterans, and 30 generic affordable apartments. So most of our projects these days, we mix supportive housing with affordable housing. And we're finding that there's a great demand for both sides of the housing. These projects were very instrumental in helping Long Island and technically end veteran homelessness as defined by the federal government. And they provide a source of housing for other veterans who need housing for when people move on from here. Once again, we didn't receive any significant opposition here. The head of the Civic Association was an architect, and he participated in helping the design, and they supported the project. This project just won Project of the Year from Vision Long Island for what's called smart growth. So this is built right in a village where there's walking distance to shopping and transportation, and it took an abandoned nursing home and developed beautiful, safe housing. Next slide, please. So this is a project that we also did with NEF in Coney Island, and those of you who know Coney Island probably equate it with the First Nathans, the Cyclone, which is a historic roller coaster that will scare the hell out of you when you get on it because it's really rickety and really fast. And in general, Coney Island has just a lot of history, but had fallen into hard times. There was a rezoning, and there was a hope that there would be development there, and there really wasn't much development until now. And so we were one of the first buildings to break ground, and now all around us there's developments, affordable housing, market housing, and this project was really difficult. It was about 8 different funding sources. We had phone calls with NEF and Bank of New York and 3 divisions from New York State, 3 divisions from New York City, and they literally went on for hours, 5 or 6 hours, 35 people on a call, but we eventually closed on it, and it's a $69 million project, 82 homeless veterans, all with vouchers from NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority, and 53 affordable apartments. For the 53 affordable apartments, we got 40,000 applications. And it's really wonderful housing with many of the apartments that have a view of the ocean. You know, we have some struggles. It's hard to fill up a building with 82 homeless veterans all at once. Housing first model, lots of substance abuse, lots of untreated mental illness. But the other side of it is people who really, really appreciate the housing. And if you want to see a video on this site, there's one on our website, concernhousing.org. Next slide, please. So this is a project that literally just opened within the last several months, 3 or 4 months. We completed it, filled it up, actually more than that, about 6 months ago. We filled it up during COVID. This is 77 units, 25 dedicated to veterans, another 20 prioritized for veterans, supportive housing, and the balance just affordable units. We had significant opposition here. The local civic basically didn't want us, and they got the town supervisor and the state senator to say they would protest in front of the site. And a lot of it is about language. So, you know, we're comfortable using the word homeless veterans in settings like this. But on Long Island, when you mention the word homeless, it automatically triggers opposition. So we were out there saying we were going to provide housing for veterans who didn't have a place to live, a permanent place to live and everything. And then the state put out an article, a press release that said, you know, homeless veterans in Port Jefferson, and everything blew up after that. To make a long story short, you know, we worked with the Civic Association. We brought them to different places that we ran, and we gained their support. We reached people who knew how to reach them, and over a period of 8 or 9 months, they went from unanimously opposing the project in a meeting to unanimously agreeing not to oppose the project. They didn't approve of it, but they agreed not to oppose it, and that was helpful. And it's just a wonderful place, and it's great to bring others to the new places that we develop, because, and there's also a video on this place. This project just won Best Affordable Project of the Year for Long Island from Long Island Business News, and we were really happy about that. Next slide, please. And these are both the same project. You can do both of them. Next one, yeah. So this is a project that we're doing in Southampton, and Southampton is one of the wealthiest communities in the country. And we were really surprised when they called us. The town called us. I would have never ever thought of developing supportive housing or housing for homeless veterans in Southampton, but the head of affordable housing for the town called and said, you know, there's a church that has 5 acres of land, and we'd love for you to come out and develop it. And I said, really, you know what we do, right? And she said, I absolutely know what you do. We've been to your sites, and we think it would be wonderful. And so we are in the process of getting the land rezoned at this time. It's been a difficult process because there's the requirement for public meetings, and the public meetings have been by Zoom. It's been a bit chaotic, but we're moving it along. And once again, we're going to work with NEF on this project, 60 units, 30 for veterans who don't have a permanent place to live, and 30 more terminology. On Long Island, they don't like to call it low income housing. They don't even like to call it affordable housing. They like to call it workforce housing. And Southampton has an incredible workforce problem. It's the wealthiest community in the world, and if you don't have money, you have to travel an hour and a half to get there. And many of the businesses, as we're experiencing countrywide now, cannot find employees. So if people can live closer to the village, then they can be employed there. So I'm going to stop there and hand it back to Deb. You're on mute.
Thanks, Ralph. I'm off my mute now. I really, it's been a wonderful 10 years partnering with you and seeing the evolution of projects, and appreciate you're fighting, you go from full support to having to, do basically a minor political campaign locally in order to get these deals through. So I think Brad has some interesting stories as well, and can empathize with the projects where you have a large concentration of veterans experiencing homelessness and having to lease up these buildings quickly under the tax credit program. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Brad to tell us a little bit about the many projects that Cloudbreak has done.
Great, thank you, Deb, and thank you, Ralph. So Cloudbreak Communities is a developer of service-enriched affordable housing for veterans and other special needs groups. Veterans have been our primary target. We started back in 1993 serving veterans before it was cool. And so we've been doing it since. And we've had a lot of experience with a variety of tools, tax credits being one of those tools that we've began to integrate in the late 2000s. And have been using that tool as part of our expansion plans and continuing to grow our campuses. You can move to the next slide, please. So today, our total locations, we do planned, master planned campuses for the populations that we serve. It's rare that we can get to the volume in a single phase. And so we plan these out well ahead. We're located in Phoenix, Arizona, in Inglewood, California. We have a campus in Las Vegas, Nevada, Houston, Texas, and Oahu, Hawaii. Today, I'm going to focus on specifically the LIHTC or the low-income housing tax credit properties, but do know you'll get a little bit of the broader look at the total campus in each of those locations. And I just put out there, we kind of refer to ourselves as a special needs housing developer that uses tax credits as part of the mix, but we are not a tax credit developer in the sense that that's all we do. We will take any means necessary to create the housing that's required for the population. So next slide, please. Just quick overview for goals today. We'll try and give you a quick overview of our low-income housing tax credit projects, that most of which involve NEF and DEB, National Equity Fund, as the investor. I want to give you a little bit of background on the state of Arizona and its more unique approach to really integrating housing development for veterans within the state of Arizona, which is a replicable approach. So I want to try to also give you a little bit of a blueprint that you might be able to take back to your community and really advance the development of housing through the low-income housing tax credit program for veterans and other high-need populations. So next slide. So our overview, so we have low-income housing tax credit projects in 3 out of our 5 campus locations. Those locations are Phoenix, Arizona, which is inclusive of Victory Place Phase 3, which is a 75-unit building, and Phase 4, which is a 96-unit building. Inglewood, California, which is 196 units as an expansion to that campus. Houston, Texas, which Travis Street Plaza, 192 units. That was also a campus expansion. Next slide, please. So there in Houston, we have a complete campus of about 3 acres that is master planned around 534 total units of housing for homeless, formerly homeless and at-risk veterans. That consists of a Midtown Terrace building, which is a 286-unit motel conversion, old Days Inn motel that we converted into studio apartments. Travis Street Plaza, which is the low-income housing tax credit of which NEF is a partner, and provides 192 units of brand new studio and some one-bedroom apartments. And then Light Rail Lofts, which is a small addition of 56 units that will also provide that long-term support and permanent supportive housing setting. However, does take a mixed approach as opposed to our other buildings, which I'll try to touch on a little bit more to tie into Ralph's presentation, but it will be about 50% homeless dedicated and 50% workforce housing along the light rail there in Houston. It's got tied to it 100 project-based vouchers in that campus, which will tie into some of the fair housing stuff we'll talk about later. And the primary support services partners, which are absolutely critical to making any of this stuff work, is of course the local Mikey E. DeBakey VA Houston Veterans Affairs Hospital, as well as US Vets. Next slide, please. Inglewood, California consists of two primary buildings, West Side Residence Hall and West Side Residence 2. Residence 2 is the tax credit project. The total campus 497 units, and West Side Residence Hall of 300 units is actually our flagship site. So that's the first deal we ever did around under the banner of Cloudbreak Communities and specifically targeting homeless veterans. And that was back in 1993 as part of the Century Freeway expansion project at the time, which I won't get into too much detail, but that campus and site is home to 50 project-based VASH vouchers, and the primary support service partners are the West LA VA itself, US Vets, and FAM, all of which are co-located onto that campus. Next slide, please. And finally, we have Phoenix, Arizona. And Phoenix consists of 4 total buildings. You have kind of a master plan map there to give you an idea of how we future plan for any one project. In the bottom left of that map is all the original phases. So those are the wounded does, more or less, that with a good rehab and a good refresh can get more transitional type living put into place relatively quickly and surrounded by accessible permanent supportive housing where somebody can truly live out their path towards independence. And so in those buildings, the 2 tax credits are phase 3 and 4. Those are depicted on the map in the very top and the very right of the total campus. Total campus is at 225 units. And consists of phase 1 and phase 2, which were purpose built for transitional and permanent housing. We have only 15 project-based VASH, even though half the community is on a voucher of some type in total. So primary support services partners at the Phoenix campus is the Phoenix VA itself and Community Bridges, a nonprofit as well. So next slide, please. So that's a little bit about Cloudbreak and just the projects we've been able to complete and use the tax credit program to enhance what we had already started, primarily using city and state home dollars and CDBG and a variety of different, as well as our own balance sheet to make happen and build the real estate out and then use the tax credit program as an enhancement. So in all of our campuses, you'll find a product that looks older and clearly was rehab versus really pretty stuff like all of Ralph's developments, just very high quality housing. And that's what the low income housing tax credit really gets you, is a really high quality resource that can be delivered for the purpose of ending somebody's homelessness or preventing it. But I do want to take you a little bit over to the Arizona state who has done things a little bit differently, and over the past decade has been able to develop on whole about 2,000 units of affordable housing for homeless veterans through the tax credit program. And the reason it was so different in Arizona than most states is very early on, and myself at the time, I've been with this partnership in some way, shape, or form in 2001, with the exception of a time period from 2009 to 2011, where I jumped over to the Arizona State Department of Veterans Services and was tapped to create the state's first action plan to end homelessness among veterans. And what we knew as a small state agency at the time was that we didn't have the money or the resources to be the provider, but we could strategically use our planning and what resources we did have our limited resources to leverage and catalyze better federal investment and better outcomes for kind of other programs. And so one of the things that we did early on, in fact, it was even prior to, for those who are familiar with United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, or USICH, and the Opening Doors Federal Strategic Plan, Arizona was actually developing its strategic plan right alongside of that prior to any publishing. And so we were working very closely on the federal level and the state level to create the Arizona Action Plan. Part of that was we had no control over the State Housing Finance Agency, which in the state of Arizona is the Arizona Department of Housing. But we could make recommendations, and one of those recommendations was to adopt a set aside inside of the qualified allocation plan within the low-income housing tax credit program to specifically ensure that every year we add to the housing stock to match what was coming out in HUD-VASH and other resources that we knew were going to begin to come out over the next several years as they did. So we, with a supportive director over there, Michael Traylor at the time, put into the tax credit program an independent set aside that is competitive in nature and brought a whole lot of developers to the table that would have otherwise never been in this space, but for the tax credit set aside. And which is really great, because that's also spurred a wide variety of partnerships that have led to other types of housing that have come about as a result of this kind of focus and starting to integrate the housing development world with the homeless services world. And if you think those are one and the same, you're mistaken. And unless you're living in both, then you're making assumptions, and those worlds really have to be brought together. And this was one way that was very effective for the state of Arizona to be able to create much more of this housing. Of the 2,000 units, Cloudbreak has developed less than 200 of those under this program, which means that other developers have come into the space, partnered with organizations that can provide services, and have really built up the total capacity throughout the state to serve homeless veterans, which is a fantastic outcome. You can also find, and Cindy may be able to send something in the chat, but NCHV did a publication since Arizona's adoption, what other states, territories, locales, and state housing finance agencies have done something around set-asides or point distribution, and lots of different ways to skin that cat. But NCHV does have a document that details that. Perhaps that can get shared out by Cindy. So next slide, please. So I just want to give you a little bit of what was kind of important to bringing that resource to the table in the state of Arizona, specifically in things that you might consider or could do back in your own communities. If you haven't explored this space, whether you're on the continuum of care side and serving people in the homeless arena, or if you're on the housing development side and interested in using your tools and skills and resources to impact homelessness among veterans, what you can do. And a big part of that, I've provided a link here first and foremost, is know your housing finance agency. Every state has one. A lot of times it's a housing department, but some states it's an independent agency from that. You'll have to look it up if you don't already know inside of your community and find out who your housing finance agency is and begin discussions with them about what is being done and what could be done potentially to strengthen veteran housing development within your state. If you're on the development side, you'll need to know your continuum of care. That is a HUD designated. There are hundreds of them across the country, and you can look up and quickly find what continuum of care is in your area and start to engage with them from a developer standpoint. Hey, I'm interested. Can we start to look towards partnerships? Then you can use that to jointly together if needed, and you don't have the current set asides or you don't have a point distribution or you have one that is not adequate to actually produce the housing, then you can begin to start to advocate through various mechanisms, your local coalitions, your legislatures, et cetera, to influence the QIP or the qualified allocation plan and how that gets created and codified in your community so that we can attain these goals. So if you are part of the COC, one great way to quickly learn is find your housing finance agency and get a list of everybody who's been awarded, all those developers. They tend to be relatively consistent. You'll see a lot of names come up over and over on those awards, and they're usually limited, but you'll see those in the number of awards they can get in a certain year. But you will see those familiar names, and those are your targets to start to engage and try and talk to those developers about merging the two worlds in a way that can actually produce a benefit of housing for homeless veterans. Developers can do the same thing. Find out who your continuum of care is, get the list of HUD-funded grantees in your area. By no means are you limited to partnering with HUD-funded agencies. There are far more than that out there, but that's a quick, easy resource of a space that you can go and start to engage with people who are with organizations that are designed to meet the service needs of individuals in housing. Get to know them and start those discussions as well. And then perhaps most importantly, in trying to realize any vision, is make sure on the early end of all your planning, there's lots of strategy plans that go on all throughout our cities and our states, especially the large urban cores. And every chance you get to get those strategies codified into ending homelessness plans, affordable housing plans, and all of the like, get them in early and often. And even if there's not momentum today, there might be 3-4 years down the road because it is codified in the plan. And so really pay attention to those areas and get your strategy and your vision into every single state, city, federal, local, state plan that you can get it into. That's only going to help you down the line when you're actually in the advocacy push and getting to a place of making it a reality. So I'll give you those as a bit of overview and some things to initially think about. And you can go to the next slide, please. And just pitfalls and planning, some things to think about. Supplement services. So one of the biggest areas of challenge is having the adequate service level. A reliance entirely and solely on, say, a HUD-VASH program to come in and provide the project-based subsidy and the attendant services will vary from community to community, and it will, its level of intensity, whether your VA is entirely engaged in this or not at the time, and what's happening with the hospital, what's not happening with the hospital, all of which amounts to, in your early planning, you need to plan for, regardless of if there's a mainstream services resource like that which comes with HUD-VASH, that there is a supplemental service plan for the day-to-day and really peer-based supports that are necessary. And the VA can help with some of that, but they can't cover the total of that. So, you really need, if you're going to serve homeless veterans in these types of resources, the services need to be on point, they need to be consistent, and they need to be often. And so just know that going in, that you cannot rely solely on what is provided from a mainstream resource. You really need to plan for the supplemental supports that are going to be necessary to be successful and have veterans be successful. Explore the project basing with your local public housing authority. That's a really easy way to make sure you never run afoul of fair housing and things of that nature, because it puts a whole different layer into the project. And so project basing can be really good if it's done early in the financing and can help with the financing of the low-income housing tax credit project. But even if it's done after, it can help really maintain your unit mix of what's going towards this. It can help consolidate services and beef that up and lessen the amount of supplemental services you've got to get into the project. So definitely explore that. And as part of, while you're advocating for your low-income housing tax credit program, you're also advocating with your public housing authorities to engage in the project basing of the HUD-VASH resource specifically.
Brad, I was going to go to a couple of questions for Ralph as we wrap up into our last 20 minutes for the panel.
Yeah, this is, I'm trying to track to make sure we're on to questions by 12:40. So yes, thank you.
Sure. And I think these last 2 points, screening criteria meets the population's actual need is important. I think we could get into some of that, of like the nuances of working with the QAP, maybe in some of the questions.
Sure.
Yeah. And I guess what I wanted to do was make a little bit of time for there's, as you were talking about the nuances of working with the tax credit program, it can be your friend, but also sometimes you have to understand the rules of the game pretty clearly. And something that Ralph has run into is that there have been veterans who want to go to school full time, but then that can run into conflict with the rules of the tax credit program. And I wanted to hear from Ralph if there was any progress in this area.
Okay, thanks, Deb. And thanks, Brad, for a great presentation with a lot of great ideas and good advice. And I have some questions for you at the end if we still have some time.
Sure.
But so very, very frustrating that, we're working with formerly homeless veterans, many of whom have had disabilities and are not in a position to gain competitive employment, especially the competitive employment that they want to. And they have educational benefits. They can have schooling paid for, through their veteran benefits, yet they're in housing where we're telling them you can't be a full-time student and live in our housing. So we researched this for years, and I'm almost a little embarrassed to say that it was one of our residents who actually came forward, after reading some of our materials and Googling that there are exceptions to this, and we knew about the exceptions for family households. So there's things where if one of the family members is not a full-time student, or a whole bunch of things, but most of our housing is single occupancy. People are in their own apartments, and if they're a full-time student, then they're not eligible. But she brought out an interesting exception to that, where if a student participates in a program receiving assistance under the Job Training Partnership Act, Workforce Investment Act, or similar federal, state, or local program, they could be eligible to go to school full-time. So we looked into this further, and in New York, as in every state, there is a state-sponsored vocational and educational department that specializes in helping people get education and get back to work. And in New York State, it's called Access. And we got in touch with them, and we found out that they are funded under the Workforce Investment Act. And so the individual referenced, she had gotten into Columbia University's nurse practitioner program and was really psyched about it because they were giving her a lot of money to go. She had some gaps, but then she was faced with giving up her housing. So we worked on this, and we worked with Access, and we worked with NEF, who's the funder, to check, IRS regulations. And we worked with them to come up with an IPE, an individual plan that includes the education, that this was an important component of her rehabilitation and her recovery. And Access was great, the New York agency. They came up with a really good plan that integrated the Columbia University training, schooling that she would get, and even gave her some money for it and some expenses, other expenses, funding for other expenses. And so right now she is enrolled in the program and is in our housing. Is not threatened to lose her housing. Terrible situation for somebody to face. Either do something with my life that I want to do, or I have my housing, and to choose between those. So I'm really very enthused and excited to see how this will work out, and try to use it with other residents who want to go to school full time. And I think it's something that, these are national laws. So in New York, it's Access, but in different states, there are different departments. And so I would encourage people to look into this and let your residents know that they could be eligible to be in the housing and go to school full time.
So this is the student has to participate in a program that gets assistance under, you said, the Job Enforcement Act. Is that right?
What's the Workforce Investment Act?
Workforce Investment.
Or other, and then there's it's Workforce Investment Act, Job Training Partnership Act, or under similar federal, state, or local programs. So I think it gives a lot of leeway. It mentions the two specific acts, but a similar, vocational educational rehabilitation.
That's what I wanted to get that point across. Yeah,
Yeah.
that it didn't have to just be those two programs, or similar. I just want to make sure I heard that right. Okay,
Yep.
great. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I think the best outcome on that is we get the GI Bill to be one of the exemptions. But yeah, we used to have that, Ralph, in the old VRAP program, which was a homeless veteran specific educational program where that was okay because it was JTPA funded. But yeah, it's a challenge and one that really does need a fix, and our veterans need to be able to access their GI Bill without risk of losing their housing as a result.
So we should work on that too. I know this is something Senator Schumer would certainly be interested in.
Yes.
If we can help do that, get it going from New York, that would be wonderful.
Yep.
And then I wanted to ask Brad about, fair housing. You were talking about set-asides in the QAP. If that doesn't run afoul with fair housing?
Yeah, so the way it's been described and put into the Arizona QIP has evolved over time, and part of that evolution is around fair housing, but started as a hard set aside, population specific, and kind of softened a bit to a veteran preference, which veterans do not, they're not a protected class, and you can actually bring veterans, in and have them prioritized on your wait list. If you didn't have a qualified veteran, then you would need to move to somebody who is unqualified. And having those in your preferences and screening criteria alone doesn't create a condition of providing disparate impact. And in fact, because minorities are so overrepresented in the military, if anything, it actually promotes greater diversity within your population. And so usually get around that. The biggest fail-safe way, though, is, again, going back to talking to your public housing authorities and really trying to get the project-based voucher piece in there.
You mean the VASH program?
Yeah, the VASH program. And once that's done, you really are at complete safety from any type of fair housing, which can happen.
Actually, I never really had a trouble with some of my vets only projects, because there would be on VA land, like enhanced use leases, which were restricted to veterans. And so if there was the general public use law was amended for the tax credit program, that if you had a state or a federal program that had a restriction for like women experienced, persons experiencing domestic violence, for instance, or there was housing that was done for farm workers, or there's for veterans, I seem to recall that it was if you had some state, purpose, your restriction that allowed it, or if these populations were receiving special services to support their independence, that was also allowed. But
and that's the point. It's really around, restrictions that really make it really safe. It's fine to do and engage in, but restrictions help just make that safe. That can be project-based vouchers or deeding on the land or whatever, the case may be. But we do have those fair housing, here in Arizona. A different developer used the tax credit program to create this wonderful American Sign Language community where everything in the building was, had lights and flashing, and had all the technology to really support people with hearing impairments.
Right.
And that ended up being a 5-6 year battle with HUD around fair housing, of whether they could restrict their housing to people with hearing impairments, which was just absolutely amazing and took an incredible chunk of time and money to get through. And that's unfortunate. You can end up in the battle for all the wrong reasons.
Exactly. And then I also wanted to take a moment to talk to both of you about, we were just coming out of the pandemic, and we had populations with different deficits and impairments, and we had to keep our residents safe in these properties. And maybe I'll start with Ralph. What were some adaptations you did to keep both your staff and your residents safe? And are there any elements that you see as best practices to carry forward as you do your new projects?
So this could be a workshop and a full day.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I get you.
I'll try to be brief, because I feel like we've come through so many stages of this pandemic, and so early on, it was a stage where we really didn't know how this spread, and we were just being very conservative. I was on a 3-day ski trip, and the world changed from when I came back, and personally, COVID spread through my family really quickly, and we were over COVID before anybody even really experienced it. But in our agency, what we just started, we take the same approach to almost any issue, which is really you have to track things. You just have to track everything to figure out where you are and where you're going and set goals. And so we just started tracking cases, like who's sick. We started, looking at, who people have been exposed to. And our HR department just really stepped up and this became full time for them. Just tracking everything, talking to residents, talking to staff about how to keep themselves safe. We focused on protective equipment very early on, and long before we there were any mask rules or anything like that, and even before it was determined that everybody should be wearing masks. We had everybody wearing masks internally. We spent about $60,000 within the first month on PPE, and we were also very good at getting money to fund that, but we didn't wait to fund it. We closed down community rooms. We distributed all the PPP, and then there was the stage of testing. We did a lot of what we call deep cleaning early on, and really relaxed people. We had people coming in with suits and cleaning buildings. That was a waste of money. It's not how it spreads, but it made people feel safe. We rented an RV to keep outside some of our community residences that could move around in case some of the people living in congregate settings got sick. And then there was just one period of time where New York City was incredible. It was in the midst of this COVID crisis with thousands of people dying. There were these large protests in the streets, some of them right outside our buildings, hundreds and hundreds of people. We're one of our buildings is close to a police station, which you think would be a safe place. It soon became one of the most chaotic places in the city. And it was just, and it was really hard for staff. Didn't feel safe. And we have 24/7 facilities. People have staff that are there 24/7.
Critical.
And they couldn't get to work. And so we paid for Ubers for people to get to work. We did that for like 9 months. We spent a fortune on that. And then recently, the most of the focus has been around vaccinations. And once again, we're tracking everything and offering incentives. We offered gift cards to residents and staff long before the federal government did that. And we set a goal for June 30th to be at 70%, vaccinations. And I'm happy to report we are at 67% today. And I spent my morning calling around trying to get more people vaccinated. And about 58% of our resident population is vaccinated. So it's been a long haul, and it's been changing things every week, every month, in how to approach it. But fortunately, with 1,500 residents, it's tragic that we had 4 deaths, but we think that is a really low number, and I think a lot of the steps that we took helped keep that low.
That's amazing. That's an important story. And Brad, were you also your campuses were probably equally challenged, keeping.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I think the only thing, a very similar experience, shutting down community rooms and doing all of that. But and our degree of communication with our partners, just we at the start of that, we were on daily calls with everybody, all hands on deck, and those lasted at least 3 times a week for the until just recently. We just decided to move one back to once a week last week. So and so the communication got a lot tighter, especially since we had a lot of service personnel that were no longer on site, which was a whole different challenge because the property team, because we're managing assets, we were all essential workers. So we stayed on our campuses but we didn't have the same degree on the services side. And so that was its own challenge that mostly overcome through enhanced communication and making sure they were there when they needed to be there. So at any rate, I don't challenge the way people handled it differently, and it just it was a tough, complex time. Let's just say that.
Well, are either of you guys pursuing the opportunities to like find a motel or hotel or extended stay residence and convert it to a more permanent supportive housing? I know, like, Brad has his campus in Houston that had the days in, and they also have a place in Vegas, but Ralph's mainly done new construction. So I'm kind of be curious of what either one of you think about with this new ARP money coming. There's a potential possibility for conversions if you're thinking about that as a business line.
I had a question for Brad, that conversion, because we are looking at some hotels, and New York just passed legislation that eases up on zoning for converting hotels to housing, and also funds the project. So I'm wondering, that days in, like, what was the actual physical transformation? Were you able to use existing rooms and like put a kitchenette in it, or did you have to break down walls?
Yeah, no, it was essentially a gut it down to the studs and rebuild it to contain a small kitchenette as well as a bathroom and shower. So really, it was just a matter of taking the shell that's already there and get an independent sink in the bathroom. Usually your motels have just one sink that's in the common area, and you need one in the bathroom, and then building out an adequate, given constraints of the space, kitchenette type scenario that creates a decent studio apartment. And we absolutely, I mean, that's most of our development model. In '93, we didn't, I think we maybe had the tax credit program, but it was brand new and nobody really understood what it was. And so we were making use of other resources, and we absolutely would love to be able to continue to do that and use conversion. Those properties, our oldest properties, are also the ones that cash flow the best and hold up the best. But low income housing tax credits are so attractive because it creates such a pretty product. But that's the main difference in terms of actually the ones we've rehabbed using different resources are much more financially sustainable than the tax credits. I mean, not that the tax credits aren't, they are, but it's actually worked out better.
Do you think it's the housing type, or was the type of subsidies or what you had to fill the properties with the COC?
Little bit of both. It takes less to make happen. Also, different set of resources with a different sets of rules of what can and can't be installed. When we were in the early stages of the development, we built our model around implanting the Veterans Grant and Per Diem program, which is a transitional housing program, as a component into a total campus, and would use that as leverage to build out more permanent housing. And those things worked very well together. Using sources that aren't tax credit. They do not work very well when you're trying to integrate, especially 9% credits as opposed to 4%. So.
Well, I hope, Ralph, that you have success in your hotel hunt, and find more extended stay residences that have actually the kitchenettes already there for you. And I really also hope Southampton, that project can move forward. It's well needed for the workforce housing, and language does matter these days. And and how we communicate, people have very strong opinions that they're holding, and it's interesting how we have to spend more and more time to explain ourselves. And I do understand the front end challenges for everyone, but and Brad, I'm so grateful that you're doing these projects in so many different states, and I hope you guys can continue to grow your business line. I didn't know if you had any parting remarks. We have just like a minute left here, words of wisdom to share from your battles. Yeah.
I just look forward to seeing people in person next year at this event.
Yeah, I second that. I'm not big on the virtual stuff myself, but looking forward to in person, and just know that, you get into the space, you got to really want to do it because it's really, really hard stuff. So, it looks easy at the end of the day, but it's not.
Well, Ralph hasn't changed jobs in 28 years, so I think there's still.
And neither have I.
Neither of you. Either have I, actually.
But the job has changed.
Yes,
No,
that's
you have
true.
to evolve with the job. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. So, well, yeah, thank you both for
Thank you.
spending time with us today on this. And I will pass this back to Cindy, who will close us out.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Deb and Ralph and Brad, for sharing all of your expertise, your wisdom, the things you've learned along the way. I think it's really important for folks to hear. It is hard work, but it's rewarding work, and you all are doing such tremendous work to contribute to housing our veterans. Workforce, experiencing homeless, however we need to describe them in order to get them housed. I did just want to say, in case folks were interested, based on the last couple of minutes of the conversation, we did have a session on Monday on hotel motel conversion that looked at 3 different projects. One in Fort Worth, Texas. One was looking at Project Home Key in LA and the stuff that they've been doing around COVID. And then the last one was Carlick Manor, which is in Anchorage, Alaska, that did a hotel motel conversion back before that was a thing, sort of in 2010 or something. And so if folks are interested in that, that was one of the sessions we had on Monday. So please make sure you check out those recordings. But again, Deb, Ralph, Brad, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. And for those who are interested, we are doing a networking. It's not the same as being in person, I realize, but we do have a Zoom networking session today at 4:15 just for folks to come in together. And, depending on what we get, we may split up into breakout rooms to talk about different areas that folks are interested in. So please join us then. And thank you all. And we'll see everyone again tomorrow morning for the last opening session of conference. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.